we school the love of learning right out of a kid by the time they graduate. Like, we're just not remotely preparing a world for kids to be able to make decisions.
We're delving into strategies to engage your students on their personal interests and passions, moving away from repetition and memorization.
Sometimes we've got them so held tight. You can't do this and you can't do that. And you got to ask to go to the bathroom. You got to ask to do this. You got to do that. And then like a month later, they're totally living on their own. And we're like, I can't believe they can't think for themselves.
We'll explore designing personal and authentic learning experiences that go beyond standardization and compliance and towards meeting students where they are and forming a love of learning.
Recognizing that not every moment of every day can be this amazingly joyous, wondrous experience. I get that. However, if we go days or even weeks without joy, connection, and experience, now we've got a problem.
Join us as we discuss with Tom how to revolutionize learning environments. Welcome to the School Leaders Project. The School Leaders Project is an initiative by Toddle. Today, I have a super exciting announcement. As part of this episode, we are going to be doing a free book giveaway. So listen to the entire episode and then think of a story that you have about an authentic learning experience that you've seen in your school. You can share your story down below as a YouTube comment or share the link to this episode on your social media. Just be sure to tag Toddle App across all of your platforms. Winners of the episode will receive a signed copy of Personal and Authentic, Designing Impactful Learning Experiences That Last a Lifetime by Thomas Murray. He's our guest today and the Director of Innovation at Future Ready Schools. Without further ado, let's jump into this episode with Tom Murray. Tom, I am so excited to have you on the School Leaders Project. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. What an honor it is. And I appreciate being able to join you. So thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I'd love for you to kind of set the stage for our audience. Who are you? Who is Tom?
Yeah, so a longtime educator. I started fresh out of college, 21 years old, having no idea what I was doing, figuring it out. Started teaching elementary. My heart was there. Loved the little ones. Taught there for a number of years. Moved to the middle level. I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade for a number of years, and then was the assistant principal there. My first administrative job. Went back to elementary. Was a principal there. Went over to district office. Was there for a number of years, supervising programs, looking at things district wide. I obviously couldn't keep a job, so now I work out of Washington, D.C. Get to work with school and district leaders all across the country. And so I've really been able to see the full gamut from elementary to secondary, from teacher to leadership to at the building level to district level, and to now nationally, and working with school and district leaders all across the country. So it's been quite a journey. But at the end of the day, no matter where I go, there's amazing people working ridiculously hard for kids. And that's just something I never want to lose sight of.
What a cool perspective you have, because you, like you said, you've been in the classroom and then you've kind of zoomed out to all the different layers of how decisions get made. So I'm curious about what have been some kind of your ahas along the way.
Yeah, it's interesting. So just this past week, I was facilitating a conversation with about 40 policymakers, high-level superintendents, folks from ed tech, venture capital, AI, around kind of the intersection of AI and ed tech and all this new stuff and what was going on. And the reason I share that is inside that session was 4 undersecretaries, the highest levels of the U.S. Department of Education. So those folks, really the cabinet for Miguel Cardona. And so we were working at the highest levels. And one of the things I kept bringing it back to is we can never lose sight of what it's like to be teaching every day in the classroom. And so for me, and regardless of my role, when I was a principal, when I was at the district level and now working nationally, remembering what it's like to walk into a classroom every day, turn those lights on, and remember the incredible challenges that educators face. And so I think in response to that question for me, bringing it back to looking at how do I make sure that I, in my role, don't lose sight of the challenges that they face every day teaching, but also the opportunity that's there and helping people remember their legacy, their impact. Because I also know what it's like to be so deep in the weeds, whether it's planning and grading and all those pieces for so many kids, and trying to individualize and meet the needs of the IEP and communicate with parents and collaborate with colleagues and do this day for professional learning and all those pieces to help them to not lose sight of the amazing impact that they get to have every single day.
I think that's such a privilege of a leader, is that, like you said, as a teacher, you can sometimes be overwhelmed by the weeds. Yep. And that as a leader, you do get to kind of zoom out a little bit and keep people aligned to that bigger picture, which is why we have to be so clear about that for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think another piece to that, recognizing that voices matter and leadership is not a committee of one that we're just dictating what everybody needs to do. It's empowering voices and understanding the boots on the ground and the work that's actually happened to stay completely relevant for what we're asking people to do, to be able to transform things moving forward. Because leadership's not about doing things to people, but alongside of people to support them so that change can actually happen to create experiences that our kids need, which I love to call personal and authentic learning experiences to be able to do that.
I love that. And can you tell us your book? Tell us the title. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah. So my last book is it's called Personal and Authentic: Designing Learning Experiences That Impact a Lifetime. I'm talking about the human interactions, like what are my interests, my passions, my strengths? What do I want to do in life? And not just being a number. Like data matters in our world, but the story behind the data matters even more so, right? And so when we take a look at those examples, how do I do things that are relevant for me? Anybody that's ever taught more than one day has had kids say like, "Why are we learning this? Why are we learning this?" Right? And to me, that's a sign of one of two things. Number one, maybe it's just a really good question and we need to actually analyze some of the things that we're doing. But number two, it's a connection to, they don't have a connection to the why, to the purpose, to the, here's how this can be an impact for something that you want to do down the road. And what I know about today's learners in such a fast paced world with the world's information at their fingertips, with opportunity just so vast when they have access and the opportunity to succeed, that like they need to be able to connect to that relevance. Without a connection to the why, that relevance is so easily stifled. And we want to just be really conscious of that as we create these experiences for kids.
I love that. So you define personal, authentic, then I guess you just say is like
Yeah.
grounded in real world context, or would you have any additional definition there?
So yeah, the personal meaning, like for me, the interests, passions, and strength. The authentic being not just this one size fits all experience, creating experiences that are going to be memorable long term, and also not just the digital drill and kill on a Google Doc or death by worksheets. No kids ever looked back and said like that worksheet changed my life. Like, great, nobody's ever said that, right? But how do we create authentic experiences that are just information rich, but also experience rich, that are experiential in nature, not something that's just done to them, but something they're a vital part of. And to me, when I combine those things, we create things that truly can last a lifetime. And, I'm not naive. And I know, just having taught at all levels and recognizing that not every moment of every day can be this amazingly joyous, wondrous experience. I get that. However, if we go days or even weeks without joy and connection and experience, now we've got a problem, right? And I think sometimes we school the love of learning right out of a kid by the time they graduate. And that's where it comes to, like, every day was about compliance and like thou shall not and compliance and thou shall not. Like, we're just not remotely preparing a world for kids to be able to make decisions. I mean, we process, like, sometimes we've got them so held tight senior year, like, you can't do this and you can't do that. And you got to ask to go to the bathroom. And you got to ask to do this. You got to do that. And then like a month later, they're totally living on their own. And we're like, I can't believe they can't think for themselves. Like, really? Because we haven't really created environments for them to do it, right? Uh-huh.
You live in Pennsylvania. It makes me think of like the Pennsylvania Dutch culture of Rumspringa. Like you've lived this like very sheltered lives, and then all of a sudden it's like, you're free.
We've got to get out of our own way sometimes. And it doesn't mean we don't celebrate what's happening internal. I don't mean that at all. But I think sometimes stepping out of our own comfort zone to go to a courage zone, to say, you know what, I'm going to go check that out. I'm going to fly across the country because I'm hearing about this workforce pathway or whatever they're doing that's different. And I want to be able to push our own thinking. So it's celebrating the great things that we have going on, but having that growth mindset as leaders to say, what else can we do as the world evolves so quickly to make sure that it's relevant for kids and the experience that they have. And when I see things across the country around workforce, around these pathways that are happening, around ways that kids are having skills to be able to prepare for life, and not just graduating high school saying, I want to go to a 4-year college, spend this hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, leaving having no idea what I want to do. Leaving high school saying like, hey, here's my passion, here's my interest. By the way, I've had some skills now to be able to do it because of some of the pathways or certifications or things that I'm leaving high school with. And in some cases saying, you know what, a 4-year college isn't right for me because I want to go into a trade force. I want to go learn cybersecurity. Or friends of mine that are superintendents that have been launching cybersecurity pathways, as one example, have kids that are now graduating high school for jobs that are $70,000, $75,000 a year with the certification that they need. That, by the way, they don't need a 4-year degree. And so we think about personal and authentic. And listen, I went to a 4-year college. I have 3 master's degrees. There's nothing wrong with the traditional side of school by any means. But I think for so many years under No Child Left Behind and some other pieces, we put kids into this 4-year box to say, if you don't go to a 4-year college after high school, you're not ultimately successful. And what a travesty that was. And now we look at like, hey, why can't we find an electrician or a plumber? Like, you ever play an electrician on a Saturday? Like, they're doing pretty darn well, right? And so when you look at how do we allow kids to explore their interests, explore their passions, and say, you know what, if that's what you want to do after school, you want to go into the military, you want to go to a 4-year college, like, we're going to support that. We want to give you experiences along the way to help you do that. I don't want my own son and daughter, which is a huge part of my why, looking through their eyes and the experiences that I would want to help them create for them. How do I help create that for every child? I don't want them wanting to go to college saying like, hey, you know, I want to be a doctor. And then they go to medical school. I want to be a doctor, and never having the experience to be like, you know what? I don't like blood. This might not be a good idea. And now I'm $500,000 in debt, realize I don't want to do this anymore. Right. Like, I don't want that to happen to them. And so giving kids experiences where they can realize things and say, you know what, I thought I wanted to do that, but let's not. I was just in high school the other day. They're creating this incredible aerospace pathway because they're near a Delta. They're out in Minnesota,
Cool.
and they're near the Delta hub, and so they're training kids on, hey, they're going to have flight aviators that they can actually get pilot hours that they could leave to be well on their way to be pilots to go get jobs. And by the way, what's the projection on workforce for that? It's massive. There's a huge need there. And so how do we create experiences that are authentic in nature, not just one size fits all, that leverage interests and passions and strengths to stay completely relevant for our world, for our kids today?
Welcome to the School Leaders Project, a podcast series dedicated to helping school leaders make positive changes in their schools and communities. In every episode, we talk to extraordinary thinkers and doers about their experiences and experiments with teaching and learning, your all-in-one teaching and learning platform made for teachers and by teachers. Toddle started as a passion project in a school that thought that teaching tech should be as innovative as teaching teams. And we're now loved by more than 1,500 progressive K-12 schools all around the world.
I love that you bring up the vocations, because that's become kind of a sneaky passion area for me, is this idea of districts partnering with, local entrepreneurs and local businesses to find out what are the actual needs, where are the deficits in our community, and how might we give kids an opportunity to explore those pathways now. And like you're saying, to try on the shoe and see if it fits versus get 4 years into a degree, get 2 years into a career and go, I hate this.
Yeah, how about it? And we could talk for hours just on this one alone. People often ask me, just because I get to see a lot, and in my day job leading future-ready schools, like, what does that look like? What does that mean? People often ask, like, what does high school look like that's different? We've seen a lot of things that are different in elementary and different groupings and way we're doing things, but a lot of times high school seems to be high school, right? And so some of the things that I see around the country are exactly what you're talking about around pathways. One of my biggest shout outs I'd start, if you, again, having the national perspective is helpful here, because when I was only in my district in Eastern Pennsylvania, there's many things that I wasn't aware of, right? There's so much stuff out there. There's a movement in California called linked learning. And what they're doing is redesigning the high school experience, where freshman and sophomore year, you're doing a lot of your traditional stuff, your English and your math and all those pieces that are certainly important, core to all that. And junior or senior year, a massive part of a student's schedule is actually being in the workforce, learning jobs, learning positions, and getting credit to do so, right? So many times we take these structures and systems and saying, well, the state says this, so we'll never be able to do this, which I fully get and I fully understand. We've got to follow certain guidelines with numbers of minutes and all those pieces. But sometimes being able to push back and say, but what if we did it this way? And here's how we can do it. And they have kids in the trades fields or in working at a hospital because they want to go into the medical field, working with communications, working with cybersecurity, doing all this stuff, getting credit to do it, getting real world experience before they leave high school. What an amazing way and opportunity to do that. I think for a long time, we've done things where it's like dual enrollment and those things. So it's academic in nature, which I think is wonderful. But those were all great experience. Yeah. And as was I. And that's a great experience for a kid that wants to go to a 4-year college to be able to get ahead. But now when high schools are saying, well, hold on, we'll also give you an associate's degree by the time you graduate high school. And now you're leaving high school with a diploma and an associate's degree within a day of each other to be able to go. And even if you don't decide to do anything with it, you've got something else in your back pocket for life, right? And so seeing pathways developed around cybersecurity, seeing pathways developed around like aerospace and those kinds of things, or around what's relevant in the community. I'll give a shout out to a buddy of mine, the superintendent in Valverde and the work that they're doing in California. It's a really high need district, a large district, about 25,000 kids. But the way they started this conversation is they brought in about 200 community leaders, business leaders, churches, places like that. And they said, we've got your next 25,000 employees. What do you need? And they started there.
Yes.
I mean, on one hand, it's like, wow, that's amazing. On the other hand, like,
Obviously.
shouldn't that be common sense? Like, why is that such an innovative idea, right?
Why are we just doing this now?
Because if you look at the amount, like ask businesses the amount of that they're spending and replacing people and retraining people and giving them basic skills and remediation type things, if we can get ahead of it with them. So like, let me just give you one example of what they did. So they created, because they also want to give kids this real world experience, they created this printing shop. Because they said, well, as a district, we're outsourcing and we're all this stuff for printing of things like T-shirts, signage, all that kind of stuff. They've said, as a district, we're spending X amount as a district in this area. What if we took that amount and invested it in our own program? And their students, I don't know what the exact numbers are. I want to say they grossed it was like $1.5 million in sales last year, to the point that they had a couple printing press area type places in the community being like, you're taking our work. Right, which is an interesting perspective. Yeah. But everything they do is now, by the way, designed by kids, created by kids. When the machine breaks, fixed by kids. They have people, and so they bring people in. But now these students are also, they leave high school, and if that's what they want to do with life, they can get a job the next day, right? And they've got experience doing it, and it's also making money for the district, and it's all student led. And so a lot of times we look at like how we can never do that because we don't have, $1 million to run something like that and all the paper and ink costs and all this stuff. Well, yeah, but if you can create it in a sustainable model where it's led by kids, what an amazing opportunity to be able to do that. Just yesterday, I was leading through Future Ready Schools. We lead cohorts where I'm leading right now in Louisiana. It's about 15 school districts on creating digital learning plans for sustainability and innovation. And one of the things that we were talking about is a high school that, a lot of going to the ed tech side of things and the one-to-one. And as a former tech director myself for a number of years, that was one-to-one, looking at, okay, like we've got thousands of devices, looking at replacement costs, what happens when they break, who fixes them, massive costs to all that. And one of the high schools that we've worked with has created a program where it's actually kids that are getting certified that are now getting paid to fix devices. So it's decreased the amount of time it takes because they're no longer sending them out. They're actually now getting paid by Dell and HP that have these programs to be able to say, hey, well, if you're going to fix them internally, we'll basically pay you to do the warranty of it. And now kids have after school jobs that are interested in technology. They're making money. It's decreased the costs by far for the district because they're not paying excessive costs and they're paying like reasonable rates for students to do it. And again, like what an amazing opportunity to put kids to work, have kids that want to do it, give them a life skill, and create more of a sustainability model for a district.
Well, and there's no why associated. Like a kid's not going to be like, why am I even doing this?
Why are we learning that? Why are we learning this? Well, because they see the direct connection, right?
Right.
And so I think, when we see those types of things and those types of programs, and I could go on and on about the types of programs that I've seen around the country that are related to workforce that I think are really, really, really important. At Future Ready Schools, we do a lot of work in this area. We actually have, for our listeners, Future Ready Schools, if you go to futureready.org, bipartisan nonprofit, we don't sell a darn thing, but one of our partners, we offer this, and I believe you're in Colorado. I believe that you all may be familiar with this because I think there's a statewide, or maybe it's New Mexico. I'd have to think about that. But there's this Pathways to Career dashboard. And if you go to futureready.org and you click on some of the work, you'll see Pathways to Career. And we've partnered with them. It's free access for a state. And what you can do is you can go into your state. So you could go into Colorado and it gives you projections of the world of work moving forward based on your state. Now you can work with them as, if you're, it's not cheap, I'll tell you that. But on the regional, if you're a regional agency, you can look more specific of like, hey, we're like in the northeast quadrant of Colorado, break it down for that. We don't have access to that because that's more specialized area, but it gives people and leaders the ability to say, well, what are the projections for the world of work for the jobs? And so I'll just give you an example of how this plays out. A lot of times when we're working with school boards and we want to make changes or we want to change our programming or we want to make investments, we've got to get to that why, just like we were talking about for kids in the classroom, right? So if we can lead conversations to say, in our home state, there's projected double-digit growth in the area of cybersecurity and this and this and this. We need to create programs that are going to provide jobs for students when they're finished, like to prepare them for that. And let's also look at, by the way, in our state, look at the shrinking rate of this area, this area, and this area. And that means those jobs are being outsourced. And we think about automation and we think about AI, and a lot of those positions are completely going away. And so
Right.
are we creating, are we working with students and providing them skills that aren't necessarily going to be relevant in 5 to 10 years with the workforce, especially as how quickly it's changing, right? And so on one hand, a lot of exciting things happening. On the other hand, for school and district leaders, it's how do we make sure that we stay relevant? I'll give a shout out to my buddy. I talked about Mike McCormick from Valverde, an amazing visionary superintendent. Let me give you 2 other examples real quick of just real authentic, like personal and authentic things that I've seen. With me at the meeting, I brought in with folks from the White House and Department of Ed and whatnot. I wanted to bring in superintendents that were just real visionaries with the type of things that I'm talking about. Let me give them both a shout out for a minute and just some of the things that they're doing related to what we're talking about. First is my buddy, Dr. Jerry Almendarez. He's the superintendent in Santa Ana Unified in California. I believe they have about 60,000 kids. So it's a good sized district, very high need. It may be 100% free and reduced lunch. It's very, very high need there, kind of in the heart of Orange County, California. Well, they just launched their first YouTube studio, and they're creating curriculum and experience around social media influencing. Now, let's break that down for a minute. How many parents out there hear from their child, like, I want to be a YouTube influencer, and they start laughing, like, come on, you can never do that thing. Do you understand the growth rate and the opportunity when it comes to that kind of thing? Now, every 10-year-old, my son's a 10-year-old boy, and I'll tell you what, like, that's what he wants to do. He wakes up and he's like, how many new subscribers? How many this? And the amount of life lessons that created around entrepreneurialism, around marketing, around creating a business. There's so many life skills, narrative. Right? All personal. And so now they're going to be having kids like creating like essentially their own brand around a topic, around a theme, around something they're passionate about, starting a podcast. I mean, at middle school and high school, right? And so the opportunity to do that, sometimes we as adults look at that and we're like, oh, come on, you need a real job. Like, why don't you... right? But today, when you look at the growth rate of that, when you look at the amount of businesses that have social media folks, those kinds of things doing it, if that's a passion and that's an area you want to be able to do it, like that's one example, having a YouTube studio at a high school. Now, do you have to consider things like privacy? Absolutely.
Right.
My daughter, Paisley, she's really into horseback riding. So let me tie like the personal and the authentic to the real world and that for a moment. Really into horseback riding. That's her thing. So she went in and she wanted to be able to start to create content. So I didn't share, here's the apps you have to use. I didn't share, here's how to do it. But I started to share, hey, if you're going to start to share things out publicly, let's talk about what happens when somebody comments on something and says, you're ugly, you're fat, that's stupid, your horse is dumb, how are you going to respond to that? What's that going to look like? And we would talk through it. So if you put something out publicly, honey, and somebody responds saying like, that was terrible, that wasn't a good job. Or what if you only get one like? Like you have these conversations, which then also tie to things like mental health, which then tie to, hey, if you're going to put yourself out there, it also can become a target for certain things. But as a 13-year-old middle school girl, putting yourself out there is a really hard thing. And then guess what happens? She has this school assignment where she has to pick an area she's passionate about, and she has to do an interview and create a video. And guess what she does? She crushes it and knocks it out in like 2 hours. Why? Because she had matched her passion and her purpose to create something where she wanted to kind of document part of her journey and share part of her story. Now all of a sudden becomes something required at school. She's got the skills. She's putting it out there. And so, but the life lessons that come with that thing around creating, documenting, marketing, sharing our story. And then here's the other piece. We mentioned authentic. She's also creating for an authentic audience. Right. This is no longer this is no longer, which is a whole other world in and of itself, by the way, that I never knew before her. But it's no longer
I'm
just
in Colorado.
Yeah, that's your
thing.
But it's no longer just taking something and creating it to be on the fridge for mom or dad at home. It's now I'm going to create something for the world, which all of a sudden, if I'm putting something out there that I know is going to be public, what happens? all of a sudden I care that much
Cool.
more, and I want to be detailed oriented, and I want to get the transition in the music just right, because if I'm going to share it, it's got to be right, which is very different than all of a sudden I just
Mm.
have to. But the connections to so many facets of just life skills, things we would call soft skills, but I call them like vital skills that we need related to that.
Yeah.
So that's one quick example around social media and influencing and those things. And by the way, tell me, like, don't tell me that those courses aren't going to have wait lists the moment that they pop up. By the way, don't tell me that kids aren't going to say, you know what, I want to go to that today. So what's going to happen probably with attendance? What's going to happen with engagement? What's going to happen with all the traditional metrics when we give kids opportunities like that? That also, by the way, might not have access at home because they don't have a smartphone or
Yeah.
they don't have a device because their family can't afford it. But now I go to school and I get the opportunity. And when we look at it from an equity lens, it also helps level the playing field, regardless of what that background might be. So that's one example.
Well, and you're a dad who knows that your daughter likes horses and
Yep.
has provided those opportunities. Like,
Yep.
not every kid has somebody at home asking them those questions
agree.
and exploring
Totally
those
agree.
passions.
Yep. Yeah. And it's a good opportunity to continue to coach, especially as a middle school girl and as a former middle school principal. Like, it is a hard age, right? But to give them a creative outlet, right? To share
Yeah.
their thoughts, share their interests. Because put her in a classroom, she's a really quiet kid. She thrives academically, but she struggles with, and I don't know if struggles is the right word. She's just a quiet, kind of introverted kid in the classroom. Yeah. But share something with the world, and she gets videos that get 5,000, 6,000 views. And I know that that's not what it's about, but her, it shows like people are watching. Like, I'm creating stuff and people are watching, and it gives her a voice in a different way for an authentic audience around something that she cares about and that she's passionate about, that translates to so many other skills down the road. And in all seriousness, looking at it like as a dad, being like, hey, honey, I speak professionally. You want to create some content for me? You're 13, right? Like, the opportunity to be able to do that. Let me give one more shout out to and talk about creating these experiences that are personal and authentic in nature, that are relevant. My buddy, Dr. Calvin Watts, he's the superintendent in Gwinnett County in Georgia. They're the 11th largest school district in the country. They're one of the most diverse school districts in the country. They just launched this year the first high school pathway in the state of Georgia, and we believe nationally. We don't know of any others out there. And if you're listening to this, if you know others out there, point them my way and I'll connect them with Dr. Watts. A first pathway for artificial intelligence. So you have high school kids. What are they doing? Yeah. So you have high school kids that are starting to study artificial intelligence, start to leverage tools to start to create some of their own things around apps and different pieces. I mean, you look at the explosion of that in the last, 6 to 12 months, and it's something that's been around for a real long time, but you look at the explosion of that in the last 6 or 12 months, what high school kid that's interested in that stuff doesn't want to take that? And so when you take a look at, here's an area with tremendous growth rate for the workforce that is obviously very, very relevant. Can't argue against that. Saying to high schoolers, hey, let's create a pathway that if this is something you're interested in, you can leave with. And I got to be honest, I don't know what certifications look like specific to that. A little bit more familiar with cybersecurity and whatnot. But you get a kid that's very familiar on the AI side and the cybersecurity side leaving high school. Don't tell me they don't get their pick of about 10 jobs that are doing really, really well once they leave. Right. And so, talk about personal and authentic right there.
And all of the UNICEF documents, I'm deep into the policy wormhole of AI right now. And everything is saying that the best thing we can do for AI is have children's voice in the creation process.
1,000%.
Right. So what an authentic way to get that dialogue started. These kids are going to be, the opportunities might be international and insane for them,
Oh, absolutely. Well, and this conversation is a slippery slope because I've seen all sides of it. I was one of the convocations I did this summer. Superintendent, before he introduced me, said, and they're all great places, but said, all right, before we get started, and did kind of his little get up and get starting. Well, I got one other final announcement. I do want to let you know that all the AI stuff, ChatGPT, all the AI stuff, we're going to make sure it's blocked. We're going to make sure nobody has access, so that way it's not going to be an issue for you. And then some of the people started clapping, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, what a missed opportunity. Now, again, do we want kids going to ChatGPT saying, create me a 5-paragraph essay around this topic and then just hand it in? Of course not. But if you're listening, wondering how in the world AI is relevant for me or what can that look like? Number one, hey, ask the question. Number two, I was
Right.
working with a group of educators recently at a conference, and this conversation came up. And I said, let's just look at ChatGPT as a teacher tool to save teachers time to get ideas. Let's not even talk about the kids yet. Let's just start here. Because every
Let's
teacher
start
in
there.
America, right? Every teacher in America is like, how can I save time? How can it help me? What's in it for me kind of thing, which is not a bad thing. I get it. They get way too much on their plate. So I said to this English teacher, I said, okay, tell me what you teach. And she said, I teach 12th grade English. I said, give me one topic. I'm like, what? You teach Shakespeare, right? You teach Shakespeare? Oh yeah, we take Shakespeare. So I said, all right, I'm going to go into ChatGPT, and I open it up. I said, no, I have the paid for version because I use it all the time professionally in my work. But let's click over here, just kind of use the free version that you've got access to as well. And I said, let's just start with this. I said, the prompt matters because it understands if you say start to think like an educator, it'll kind of tap its own little AI brain and say, okay, what's kind of education stuff? So the prompt really matters. And I said, think like an educator and create 3 activities that I could use with high school seniors around Shakespeare. And in under 10 seconds, like ding, 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 it starts popping it out. And I scrolled on the screen and I said, all right, you're the expert. Look at these 3 activities. Do any of them seem remotely relevant? And I said, I'm not going to say that every single thing you say is going to be the most amazing thing you've never thought of. The first one was take Shakespeare characters and create a play, but it has to be in a modern Starbucks, yet they have to stay true to who they are. And the teacher's reading it. She's like, that's a really cool idea. They've got to stay true to who they are. They're going to write a little bit of a play, but using a modern Starbucks that they have to be in. And she starts to lie
what would
up.
Puck order?
And then, right. And then I said, okay, let's take this a little bit further. You like that one. So then I went to ChatGPT and I said, okay, now take that first activity, give me directions for students on how to do that. And ding, 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 ding. It was like a 10-step. Start here, do this, create this, include this, make sure to do this. And her eyes got really big. I said, all right, let me go one really further. Create a 50-point rubric based on the directions for activity 1. This rubric starts to get designed, 6 different areas, all this stuff. And her mind was blown. That all happened in probably 2.5 minutes. And so I said, let's just step back. If our notion is we're going to block this, nobody can use it, I just limited a resource that can help you create and think of new ideas. And even if you used it just to generate ideas, because I know for me, when I'm doing the same thing over and over and over and over, I can get in my own head and be like, how in the world could I do that differently?
Stuck in a rut.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it gives me a new idea, which then all of a sudden I said, by the way, did you see the excitement when we just started talking about here's a new idea of something you hadn't thought about? And by the way, here's a rubric, which doesn't mean you have to use it word for word. Now let's take all that and now let's customize it a little bit. Or to give another example, and I was getting all fired up. And I said, so what if you're saying, all right, we're 9th grade, we're going to do a 3-paragraph essay on a certain topic. All right, we're going to put our computers away. And listen, I do a lot of work nationally with ed tech. I'm a huge advocate of ed tech when it's used well. But there's often also time to put it away and just take out pencil and paper. I totally get that. So let's do a 3-paragraph essay, pencil and paper, and we can't use technology to start. You're going to write it from your own brains, your own thoughts. We're going to do some basic skills. We're going to basically do this like it's 1987, 3-paragraph essay. We're going to start. We're going to go through that process. We're going to have 2 days to do it. They do that. They write it. All right. On the 3rd day, we're going to take out the device. We're going to open up ChatGPT. And now here's what you can do. You can use your resource, but anything you pull from it, you're going to also have to cite from it. And so we'll talk about prompts. How can we ask it? How can it help? How do we have to think? What are we looking for? We get some direction. Now we're going to pull it out. And then you're going to print out that conversation with ChatGPT. You're going to print it out because now that's going to become a resource. On the next day, what we're going to do is we're going to take our original document. We're going to take what we just used from ChatGPT, and we're going to create a final document where I'm going to be using ideas. Now, I'm going to have you highlight in yellow any idea that you didn't have originally that you pulled from there in your final prompt. And then when we're totally finished, you're going to give me the final copy, which is going to be the best copy there, your original copy. And then you're also going to reflect a little bit. How did a tool help you in what areas and what ideas did it give you? And how can you cite that effectively? Because here's the thing.
So much more useful.
Right. And even if we just started with that, and by the way, that's like hardly the tip of the iceberg. Even if we just started like that, it creates a I don't want them using that tool. Let me ask this question, because then we get into the why do kids sometimes say school's not remotely relevant? So as a professional, if you're listening to this, where in life can't you use that tool right now? There's nowhere.
Right.
I use it all the time personally. right? And
But
so,
people do have misconceptions around it. They say, "Oh, it feels
yep,
like cheating or something." So that's,
yeah,
I think, the first thing to
yeah,
shake as a teacher is you
100%.
can use it.
Well, and I think it's also worth having that conversation with kids and going back into Chat GPT, taking something and modeling for them. If you put it back into Chat GPT, asking Chat GPT, did you write this? And watch what happens. So yeah, the idea is
Mm,
not just to take what we have and put it in there, because that would not be authentic. That's not really you. And by the way, that could be essentially a digital plagiarism if we're not careful. That's why we want to be able to cite. And
right.
so to me, teach kids about that. Because at the end of the day, if we try and lock and block, they're just going to pull these things out anyway and do it on that end. Now we're just
Yeah.
naive, right? Now we're
Well, and
naive.
they're naive. They don't
Yeah.
have the skills.
Right. And so, there's so many different ways to be able to do that. Take a document, take your original writing, plug it into Chat GPT and ask it to make it funnier, ask it to condense it. Now print it out, compare the two. What did it do? Do you agree with it? Don't you agree with it? Do you think it made it better? How
Mm,
did it make it better? How did the word choice change? And now you can all of a sudden, now if that's a different level of thinking, then did I just capitalize the first letter? Did I put a period at the end? Now all of a sudden,
mm.
I almost have this mini tutor, but I also have to show them examples where it's not correct. If I look up myself in Chat GPT, 90% of it's really accurate. I'm like, how the heck did it know? 10% of it, I'm like, where did that come from?
I don't know
That's
about
not
this.
true. Right. And so show them that it's not always right. And yeah, we don't want to just print it out because then we're not learning anything. However, it can take what we do to help make it better. And just like teacher, it can take what you do and make it better. You can be the greatest teacher in the world, teacher of the year worldwide, and it just gives you some ideas that maybe you didn't have. As good as you are, as talented as you are, as brilliant as you are. And so just another way to kind of think about it differently. And I think sometimes our own lens gets in the way, and sometimes we've got to
Yeah.
step back a little bit to be able to redefine what's possible, right? And
Mm.
recognize, no, this isn't here, because that fear of like, it's going to take my jobs. I like to joke, like, if you can be outsourced by technology, you probably should be. Did he
Mm.
just say, here's what I mean? Because the greatest teachers in the world can never be, because the
Right.
human interaction, the human side. Now we can leverage the tools, but to make us better, right? And so it's not just the digital drill and kill. It's also the human connection, the human side, the empathy, understanding the story, understanding what a child needs or that person needs to be able to teach differently, but leveraging the technology at the same time. It's not an either or, it can be an and I think that's so important.
So practical. I think always coming back to that question of authenticity and purpose always kind of steers you in the right direction. Like a question well asked is more than half answered,
Yeah,
right?
well said. I love that.
So, along this kind of same vein, you co authored a book with Eric Schenniger, who we also had on the show.
Learning transformed. And I'll just say, because Eric's a good friend of mine, I'm glad you had the JV on first, and I'm glad the varsity's here now. The JV typically goes before the varsity, right? No, I always give Eric a hard time, but no, he's a character and one of the smartest people I know when it comes to a lot of this stuff. Yeah, we
Super
wrote
fun.
Learning Transformed: 8 Keys to Designing Tomorrow's Schools Today.
I love that. And so I'm wondering the connections you see between the two books you wrote, because we've touched on this a bit. But if we're
Yeah.
trying to prepare kids for an unknowable future,
Yep.
why is personal and authentic learning so, so important for that?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of times people will read both books and be like, Tom, it seems like two totally different authors. So the first thing I'll say about Learning
Ah,
Transformed is anything that you read that you didn't like, that's the part that Eric wrote. So that's the first thing that I want you to know. All right, that's first thing. No, I'm just teasing on that. So the books were written really for two different audiences and for two different purposes. So Learning Transformed, we wrote for really principles on up related to systems change. So big picture levers in our systems that we need to adjust and change to ultimately shift the experience, where personal authentic is a very different read, a lot of narrative, a lot of story, much more classroom oriented. However, I've had superintendents do book studies and first year teachers do book studies. And for me, it was creating a
cool.
book that would be evergreen, related to themes around relationships and culture and people and things that it doesn't matter if it's 20 years from now, it doesn't matter if you're a 35-year teacher or you're a superintendent or you're a first year teacher just out of college, it would be relevant. So number one, the books were written for very different purposes. Going back to Learning Transformed, it was important to look at structures and systems that have to be changed or shifted to provide the experience that I think personal and authentic could then help implement per se. So that's looking at things like big picture leadership, setting that tone, culture. Number two, number three, looking at things like learning space and learning space design, community, working with our communities. And then personal authentic dives more into like the practical ideas for teachers to do certain things. So they certainly go hand in hand, but they're also
Yeah.
very different books. The other resource that I would point folks to is my day job, and that's Future Ready Schools, where we have a framework for transformation. It's really an evidence-based framework for creating schools that are future ready, and it's looking at the big
Cool.
picture areas: curriculum, instructional assessment, personalized professional learning, budget and resources like the sustainability, community partnerships, engaging. We've already mentioned that multiple times. Data and privacy, robust infrastructure, the use of space and time, and then the outside being collaborative leadership, inclusive culture, creating like taking a look at these big picture areas. Because a lot of times the mistake that districts make is they become hyper focused on kind of one area. We call them gears, to make the analogy of be inner working. I'm going to focus on this change in curriculum, instruction, and assessment. We're going to get a brand new curriculum. We're going to do all this stuff. But I didn't think about the data privacy side, and oh boy, that just went downhill, and all of a sudden we just breached trust in our community. Or I didn't think about
Yeah.
the infrastructure side, and it's great that we have all these digital resources over here, but 40% of our kids don't have access at home, as we learned in the pandemic. And how are they going to leverage that? And now we've got massive inequities going on with something we thought was well intended. And so to have a framework for transformation, I think, is really important, to recognize any of the changes that you make are never going to be completely independent of all the other
Right.
aspects to the framework, and giving school and district leaders an opportunity to do that. And so working on kind of both sides of that, learning, transform, 8 keys in the framework, there's a lot of connections and overlap there, because I wrote both sides of a lot of it, but
Yeah.
opportunities for kind of those big picture shifts and changes. And then also in both books, making sure that there are really practical examples as to what it looks like. I think it's really easy to talk from a 50,000 foot view, but the average, the educators want to, and just yesterday I was working with principals. It's kind of like, give me something I can do tomorrow with my staff. And that's where showing people the practical side. I can say anything I ever want from a stage, but if it's not practical, people at the end of the day don't really care, right? That's just the way I look at it. And so giving some
Well, let's ask you that
practical
same
ways to make that
question.
shift. Yep. Mm-hmm.
What can we do tomorrow? What should all leaders, where could we start if we're trying to be more personal and authentic in our
Oh,
schools? Where should we start?
we have another hour on that one. I love that. So for me, we've got to start with ourselves. We've got to start with our own internal work. It's so easy to point the finger. It's so easy to say, well, if my teaching partner would finally, if my principal would actually, well, if our superintendent, well, if our board, and by the way, that takes zero courage to do that. But
Right.
what's hard for me sometimes is looking in the mirror and asking the question, well, how do I impact that? How can I make that better? If that's not a good situation, what can I do to positively influence that? Right. And so that pointing the finger is really easy in our world. And sometimes that looks like a principal saying, like, well, if these 2 teachers would finally, sometimes that's a teacher saying, well, if these 3 kids would actually, or if my principal would finally let us, right. And it takes zero courage to do that. And it doesn't get us anywhere. And so I think when we think about leadership, or we think about any sort of change, it starts right here. It starts with us and reflecting, how can I make that better? Where's my circle of influence there? What do I need to learn? What can I do to support that? And the flip side is, I get it. Like, toxic leadership is very real. Toxic cultures are very real. Faculty rooms can be amazing places of celebration of student success and joy and fun and laughter. Some of them are also some of the most toxic places in the United States. And so maybe if you're in a building working like that as a first year teacher saying, hey, I love kids, I want to do a great job, but every time I go down there, like, all they're doing is ripping apart our principal and destroying kids and, yapping about something else. Like, we've got to find, how do I make this place better every single time, And so I think it really starts with work inside each one of us, and that's through reflection. I think reflection is such a key to growth. And I think as leaders, if you're not reflecting on your leadership, you're not growing. Because the interesting piece, I believe, like, we talk to teachers all the time about reflecting. We have them reflect on lessons. We give them feedback on lessons. We talk to teachers about having kids reflect on their learning,
Right.
right? And it's being such a key to growth. But I think sometimes we miss that piece with our own leadership in our own growth. And what I know about leaders is they're constantly running, constantly going on and on and on and on
Yes.
and on. And they don't have the time to walk into their office and say, I'm just going to sit and reflect on my own leadership for 20 minutes today. Like, they don't have time to do that. And I get that, right? So where do they
So how do
find
they
the
do
time
it?
to reflect, right? So where do they find the time to reflect? And I would say, well, the how, I think, is there's a immeasurable amount of ways you can do it. Number one, it can be through kind of personal devotion and personal study. It can be through reading books that you totally disagree with to see the other side of it, to challenge your thinking. And part of the reason I share that is, look how divisive our world is, right? Everything's blue
Right.
versus red, left versus right. Well, do you follow people on social media that have the complete opposite political education views that you do? Because sometimes it's like, no, I block all those people. And it's like, well, all right, well, you just created
That's
an
not
echo
helping.
chamber for yourself. And guess what? They're really passionate about the same things you're passionate about, but they see the other side. And how quickly as leaders we can jump to, well, like, well, I'm just going to block them. I don't want to listen to them. I want to. But what would we
Yeah.
ask kids to do? Right? We would never say to kids, well, yeah, just do it, block everything. Don't ever, because it's just not real life. And so I think that personal reflection can start with like making sure that your personal circle is more diverse than those folks that look like you, that have the same background as you. So if you're listening to this right now, I'd say pick up your phone. Quick activity that I do, literally 30-second activity I'll do sometimes when I do sessions on this topic. And I would say, all right, like open up your text messages. Look at your last 10 text messages, people that you have, not messages themselves, just people you've texted. And reflect on what similarities do they have with you? What differences do they have with you? Everything from race, gender, religion, all the pieces that are out there. Like who in those messages pushes your thinking? Can you have those conversations? So for me, it's also about vulnerability and humility as leadership. And I think leadership and vulnerability really need to go hand in hand. And being willing to have those conversations one-on-one that help you reflect and help you grow. So I would ask, like, who is somebody that sees the world different from you? And are you willing to have those conversations? Because everything seems so divisive today in our world, on social media, whatever the place might be. Who are you following on social media? How can you connect and follow people that see the world very different than you, right? And again, some people don't have the willingness or the mindset to do that. But to me, that helps us grow. Why are they so passionate about it? Take any of our issues today, book banning, right? And just one, everybody's talking about it. All these board meetings are talking about it. Well, are you trying to understand the other side, whatever the other side might be, right? Because we get all jazzed up and fired up about this topic and we argue our points. And certainly we're going to be passionate about what we believe in. We don't want to lose sight of that. But do we have the humility to step back and seek to understand why does somebody else on the other side of an issue, whatever side that is, see it differently? What do they believe that maybe I'm missing, that maybe I could step back and say, well, let me see why they would believe it that way. Because I think so many times, even in leadership, that's what we're missing. It can be that my way or the highway, or this is the way that I see it. And I think we need to broaden our lens and educate ourselves through reading, through connections, through social media connections, through people that have differences in our world. Do work referenced around classroom design. Well, if I'm a male designing a classroom, and invite a female colleague in and say, hey, if we had to co-teach, look around the room. Is there anything in this room just from your own lens that's different than mine that you'd want to change? Tell me why. And sometimes we almost get fired up being like, I can't believe they said I should have to do it. Well, then it becomes more about us. And then that's a self-struggle we have to do, as opposed to seeking the lens and understanding of other people, bringing it in and being like, well, yeah, if I'm a male teacher, well, guess what? There's going to be folks walking into my classroom that identify in very different ways than me. How do I make sure that they feel welcome and comfortable in there? It's just one quick example of how do I connect with people to have some empathy for differences than I have, and regardless of whatever that might look like or whatever that might be. And to me, that's such a key to leadership, because not every one of your staff members have the exact same life experiences that you do. One of the things that I call that in Personal and Authentic, I call it the hidden stories within. And, recognizing...
I literally wrote the word story on my page just now.
Recognizing the story on people's hearts that you never get to see. And in Personal and Authentic, I share it through part of Paisley's medical journey, and I share part of what she went through, and recognizing the connection for personal on what was on her heart, and some things that you can never see on her when she shows up into a classroom, but it's something on her heart every day. And when I speak about that, I then also will turn to leaders and teachers, whoever that might be, teachers, leaders, whoever it might be, and say, everything that I just talked about, you can never see. And I'm actually not just talking about her, I'm actually also talking about you. And so, if you're listening to the podcast, I'm talking about you. It's the stories on your heart that people here and now don't know. And hidden doesn't necessarily mean bad. It can also be a good thing. Like maybe this weekend you're going away with your spouse, kid free, you can't wait, but nobody else at work knows. But don't tell me it doesn't impact your lens. Don't tell me it doesn't impact your mood or how you respond to people. And hidden can also be a struggle, right? It's maybe you're listening to this and you're just struggling because your marriage is falling apart. And here you are trying to learn and grow as an educator, and you just feel sick to your stomach because last night was one of those nights in your household and nobody else around you knows, right? And it's not just about you. It's also about every child that's walking back into your classroom. And not understanding what happened in their household last night, not understanding that they haven't eaten in 24 hours. And here you are with your 3 Starbucks walking in and not even remotely thinking about it. And do we have empathy for the hidden stories that we don't get to see? And so to me, empathy and leadership is vital. And what I also don't mean is that we're lowering expectations. I want to be really clear on that, because it's easy to look at that and say, oh, well, this child's been through X. We need to lower our expectations for that kid. And like that, if that's the case, now we're part of the problem. And to be really clear that
Right.
can't be the case. But it's how do we have high expectations? Because that's a non-negotiable, but also add more love to that equation, because that's what that child needs. Or sometimes that's what that adult needs, right? And so it's high expectations plus some extra love in that. And I think that's an important piece to recognize the stories. One of the things I wrote in Personal and Authentic that I really believe is evidence-based is that the difference between making a judgment and having empathy is understanding the story. Because your brain is wired to judge. Your brain is wired to make connections. Like that is a natural thing. Your brain naturally makes connections. It's a survival instinct to understand, well, here's what's happening. When have I ever been in that situation? What do I know about situations like that? So naturally you judge. Inherently, that's not a bad thing. What we do with those judgments, that's the other case. That's where it can go bad. But the difference between making a judgment and having empathy is understanding the story. And what I often like to say, especially early in the school year, is like, for teachers, have you ever had that experience on the first day of school? And I often kind of laugh saying like, just, you don't have to admit it, but I will. But on the first day of school, you're thinking to yourself, 180 days with this one right here, right? Right. And people kind of laugh, but it's true. We've all had that being like, I've 180 days, right? But then let's fast forward. Why is it at the end of the year that one right there is often the hardest to say goodbye to? It's
Yeah.
often the one walking out of your classroom, mom. I mean, Mrs. So-and-so, that didn't want to leave. And you got
Right.
to know the
We love our
story.
little weirdos.
Yeah, you got to know the
Yeah.
story. You got the connection, or you had empathy for understanding what they've been through, right? And so that's why I really believe this story truly matters. And I think as leaders, how do we get to know the stories of our people? How do we get to know the stories of our students? Give you 2 practical ideas for teachers that I like to share. Come from my own daughter's teachers, right? And part of what I shared in some of her medical journey that I talked about in Personal and Authentic. And in 5th grade, we were virtual starting out the year, but I loved her teacher early in the year. She put out first night of school. She said, moms, dads, grandparents, first night of school, you've got a homework assignment too. You can write 1 sentence or you can write 10 pages. Here's the question. What makes your child bold and courageous? That's it.
Oh,
So process that for a minute. Teachers listening, or teacher leaders listening, wherever it might be, principals listening, process this for a minute. You see, you know what I wrote about? I wrote about what I've told you a glimpse about, right? So day 2, my daughter's teacher had some insight into the journey that she had been on for the few years prior, the amount of time she had spent in doctor's offices, the highs and the lows, and all those pieces. So she had an understanding, a little bit of the story, because she asked. But process this as well. What does it tell parents when you say to them, what makes your child bold and courageous? It shows parents that your lens is saying, I know your kid has brilliance inside. Tell me about it,
yeah.
right? Which shows that lens of like, tell me about the greatness, right? Which, man, those impressions matter. And so that's one quick example. In 6th grade, my daughter's language arts teacher, Mrs. DeLuca, an amazing, amazing language arts teacher. It wasn't the first week of school. It was maybe October. The culture was set. Some of the relationships were there. But the writing prompt was this. The writing prompt was, if you really knew me, you would know that, ... And it was the first
Oh,
time I had ever seen my daughter write about her journey and what it was like to walk into any single, it's a a very severe food allergy issue that she struggles with. And what it's like to walk into a restaurant, and the word she used was fear every time. But after the
yeah.
journey and the therapies that she had gone through for those, what turned out to be 5 years, what it's now like to walk into a restaurant and have total freedom was the word she used. And so
Oh,
it's that journey, and that way to open it up then gives the teachers a way to understand, wow, here's a kid that's been on a medical journey for 5 years, that one would walk into a cafeteria would have a little bit more anxiety. And maybe that wasn't something that was totally on my radar, but she asked, she
right.
gave the opportunity. And so I think giving people the opportunity to share their story, but they will only do it in an environment of trust, They will only do it in a culture where they feel the relationship is there, that they can open up. They will not do it in an environment of compliance and control and fear. It is not natural for your brain to do that. So how do we create environments where we want to be? And for me, that personal and authentic side of things is creating environments where people want to be so that they can thrive.
Oh, Tom, I don't know if you could tell. I teared up like multiple times while you were talking. But I just think there's just this thread in your work of love, joy, empathy, and passion. And, we don't know what the future has in store, but I can for sure say that if we move forward with those things, with love, joy, empathy, and passion, that we're going to be okay. So this was an amazing way to start my Friday morning. And I just really thank you so, so much for being on the show and for sharing the amazing work that you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. For anybody who wants to connect, my website's thomascmurray.com. You can follow me on Thomas C. Murray on Twitter, Thomas C. Murray EDU on Instagram. Would love to stay connected. Thank you, Cindy, so much for the opportunity today to connect, to share part of our story, but also to say thank you to the educators that are working tirelessly around the world for kids. Your influence is amazingly vast, and I challenge you to be bold, to be fearless, to be proud, to be you, because your story, it's not finished yet. So thanks for the opportunity today.
Thank you, Tom.